importanță menținerii sănătății articulațiilor prin nutriția acestora. Alege ce e mai bun pentru tine. Proenzi Arthrostop Rapid cu formulă inovatoare contribuie la menținerea sănătății, elasticității și flexibilității articulațiilor. Proenzi Arthrostop Rapid. Libertate în mișcare. Acesta este un supliment alimentar. Citiți cu atenție prospectul.
Prin ce trebuia să treacă un cavaler ca să merite o bere strașnică? Azi e simplu. Holsten Pilsner. Berea cu blazon.
Maria e fericită că poate să o țină din nou în brațe. Ana a aflat tot ce avea nevoie să știe. Bogdan se va opera, dar e pe mâini bune. Cristina e fericită că Mihăiță s-a făcut bine. Unul din 5 români a fost deja pacient. Facem România bine. MedLife, primul sistem medical sănătos din România.
E timpul să ai casa ta. Descoperă cele mai accesibile oferte imobiliare pe sudrezidențial.ro și personalizează-ți noul cămin după propriul tău gust. Imobile cu finanțare inclusă prin credit24h.ro.
Și pentru o zi, România ar sta pe loc. Din fericire, nu ne oprim niciodată. Și facem România să meargă mai departe, mereu, oriunde, cu plăcere.
Astăzi pleacă maică-ta. În sfârșit o să fie liniște în casă.
Mamică, nu pot să plec azi. Sunt răcită copză.
Ia Ibusinus.
Ibusinus te ajută la răceală și gripă.
Cadoul perfect pentru o primăvară perfectă îl găsești la Media Galaxy. Ai laptop 2-in-1 Toshiba cu procesor Intel Pentium, memorie 4 GB și Windows 8.1 la numai 1799 de lei. Îmbină distracția unei tablete cu productivitatea unui laptop. Vino și tu să experimentezi din mii de produse în magazinele Media Galaxy și decide să plătești online sau direct în magazin pentru cadoul perfect. Media Galaxy, cea mai variată gamă de produse.
Cauți cel mărțișor? Intră acum pe cel.ro și profită de super promoții la sute de produse. Începem primăvara cu discounturi de până la 50% pentru cele mai frumoase cadouri. Cel.ro. Bucură-te de cel preț!
Sentimente.ro. Cele mai multe întâlniri, relații și căsătorii din România. Intră astăzi gratuit pe Sentimente.ro.
Acum ai la EMAG până la 55% reducere la produsele Tefal din promoție. Alege set 5 piese Tefal Ingenio cu termospot și mâner detașabil la prețul special de 198 lei. EMAG. Online va fi mereu simplu.
Familia Suricescu, mare atenție! Luăm decizia anului! Plecăm în vacanța Cristian Tour! Prima variantă, o destinație cu soare, mare, piscine și un hotel incredibil! A doua variantă, aquapark, plajă, distracție! Varianta 1 sau varianta 2?
2.
Pregătiți bagajele și ochelarii de soare! Va fi fabulos!
Trăiește vacanța. Intră pe cristiantour.ro.
Realitatea TV și Arta Scenei prezintă Anastasia în concert live la București pe 29 iunie la Sala Palatului. Superstarul muzicii pop-rock în cel mai exploziv show, Anastasia la Sala Palatului, un concert electrizant oferit de Realitatea TV.
Mi-am pus GPL. Știți de ce? Nu-mi place să arunc banii pe fereastră. Am ales AGR Autogaz Group. Cu ei am încredere în mașină. Merg în siguranță pentru familia mea. Intră pe montează-gpl.ro și găsești tot ce ai nevoie pentru mașina ta.
Campionii aleg campioni. Alege și tu. Montează-gpl.ro.
Ca să fii printre românii care se fac auziți, de la primele dureri în gât, ia Faringosept. Oprește dezvoltarea bacteriilor, grăbind vindecarea. Faringosept, acum disponibil și cu aromă de scorțișoară mentor rom.
Aproximativ 1 din 4 oameni prezintă o variație genetică, DRD47R, gena aventurii. Dacă o ai, vei simți o dorință intensă de a explora. Dar, bineînțeles, ai nevoie de mijloacele ideale pentru ca explorarea să fie posibilă. Noul Discovery Sport. Aventura este în ADN-ul nostru.
Vedem care sunt problemele importante ale României
și ale întregului mapamond, problemele geopolitice, economice sau sociale.
Cred că o formă mai gravă de minciună este să spui frânturi de adevăr, amestecate cu lucruri neadevărate.
Prezentăm evenimentele speciale ale săptămânii, dar și protagoniștii acestora.
Din păcate, și trebuie să le spunem cetățenilor, România nu este ferită de un război.
De economia să poată prospera are nevoie de capital.
Îți arătăm faptele așa cum sunt, le analizăm din mai multe unghiuri, împreună cu invitatul special, pentru ca la final să tragem o singură concluzie.
O situație în care mai toate țările lumii sunt într-un nivel de incompetență din ce în ce mai ridicat.
În fiecare duminică, de la ora 11, Eduard Pastia îți deschide perspectiva.
Now, we watched the declarations of Putin, which for some, and for me, or for you, can raise the laugh, and we can laugh about it. But it shows, for me at least, it shows a leader that is not having nothing in common with common sense, with normal declarations of a leader, and are very dangerous, in my view, if we consider them as part of his personality. But please, you are before the break, you are saying something, and then let's comment what we just saw.
So, trying to respond to your previous question. Yes, you are right. Poland and Romania, we are pillars of security and stability in the region, and there is certain responsibility for maintaining this region stable and secure. We are also strong supporters of close transatlantic relations with the United States and strong role of NATO. NATO, with its traditional role, security of the territory of its member states, Article 5 commitments, this is something that is essential for our security. And also our vision of European Union as a strong institution. You mentioned Donald Tusk. I hope that he will be strong leader of the European Union. That
but
he is already
yeah.
Important player, but he brings also certain sensitivity and understanding of the needs and problems of our region. And also, I think his nomination, this is a kind of symbolic end of the artificial division between old and new member states of the European Union. And you mentioned also this Eurosceptical party in Poland. This is a marginal party. They are not even represented in the Polish parliament. They managed to enter European Parliament with small margin. I don't think we should take them seriously. This is a kind of exotic political initiative without a significant support in
But
society.
still, it's not a good thing. I mean, it's not
a good thing for the image of Poland. I agree.
Especially if they are in the European Parliament.
But if you take into account the general results of the European elections last year, we see certain tendency. Yes,
of course.
More populism, more nationalistic feelings, more Euroscepticism is represented in the current composition of the European Parliament. But Polish society remains Euro-enthusiastic. 80% of Poles think that our membership in the EU is something very good, something positive. You can count on Polish support for the European integration.
Not be patriotic and say Romania doesn't have any Eurosceptical MP in the European Parliament. So I had to push this also to you. Of course, Poland. That's why you are here. It remains a pillar of stability in the Euro-Atlantic area. But I want you to comment a little bit also the images we saw with Mr. Putin's declarations, with Mrs. Merkel in the press conference, the Farage and Donald Tusk declaration, and a little bit about Putin, because is this party just coming out of the air in Poland, or it's more like a plan of Putin to undermine Europe by funding or creating parties in different countries. I can give you an example which is proved, Jobbik in Hungary, and nobody, even the leader of Jobbik, recognized that.
I think what we experience right now is a tendency, yes, to try to create divisions within the European Union and to exploit some Eurosceptical sentiments.
Who is doing that?
Those who are not interested in the success of the European integration. Those who want to present EU as a kind of failure, yes, that don't want to have EU as a kind of alternative model for certain countries of Eastern Europe, like Ukraine, like Republic of Moldova.
Mr. Putin is one of them.
I think we see certain tendency in his statements, his decisions in recent years. I think that there is a kind of consistent line in Russian foreign policy, especially vis-à-vis this region of Eastern Europe. So if you go back to 2008, to the NATO summit in Bucharest,
yes.
Mr. Putin was very open in his criticism of NATO, and he even questioned the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
He managed to stop Ukraine to become a member of the NATO. Because
so he made those declarations with regard to Ukraine in front of the NATO leaders.
Sure.
At the same time, NATO leaders failed to agree on providing both Ukraine and Georgia with the membership perspective, so-called membership action plan. So I think what followed after Bucharest NATO summit, war in Georgia, certain statements, embargoes on products from Eastern European countries, criticism of the Eastern Partnership and negotiations of association agreements with those countries, attempt to create this Euro-Asian Union as an alternative to the integration, European integration. So there is certain logic in this policy, and I think the general idea is to recreate certain sphere of Russian interest on the territory of former Soviet Union and to go back to the past when the Soviet Union dominated those countries, controlled those nations, and was in kind of full control of this entire space with military means, with certain pressure, dominance, but not with something positive like an agenda of development or democracy. So I think that big difference right now between current situation and the time of the Cold War is that Russia, despite its efforts, is not able to provide those countries of Eastern Europe with a kind of valid alternative model of development. So we would like to see Russia as our partner of the Western institutions, to cooperate with Russia. But for the time being,
but not with Putin.
We see only the attempt to create confrontation with the West. And unfortunately, this atmosphere that is now in Moscow, this environment of fear, intimidation, is resulting in such dramatic events like the killing of Boris Nemtsov, one of the main leaders of the democratic opposition.
Let's go to something you mentioned and I mentioned as well, and it's, I think, crucial for Romania as well, because Romanians must understand, and this is about raising awareness, not provoking any fear. But the rules that were before, they are not anymore. And the reality proves to us that the international law, it's nothing for Putin or some other leaders. So the Romanian people, the Polish people, must expect to any evolution in the world because of these kind of leaders. And Ukraine is an example. But you mentioned, and I agree with you, and you know my analysis, which of course in this talk show with you, because you are an ambassador, I'll be softer, but I'm very blunt when it's about Mr. Putin's ambitions. You mentioned about undermining his ways of undermining the European Union as a political project. We have, and we should tell the people that 37% of the European Parliament is Eurosceptical. Now, do you consider that this plan of Putin can succeed? Can this rise, or this will decrease as a percentage in the European Parliament? Because it's ridiculous. I mean, we are part of the European Union. We have a European Parliament, and almost half of the European Parliament is against the European Union. It's like half of your MPs in Poland would be against a united Poland.
I think that what we see right now in Europe is still certain consequence of the economic crisis experienced here, especially in the Eurozone in 2008, 2009, and in the following years. So this growth of Euroscepticism, lack of trust in the European integration, this is something that was fueled by the economic problems, by the high rate of unemployment, by budgetary instability in some countries of the European Union. And I think that we need, as European countries, especially European leaders, they need to address those problems in order to recreate the confidence of the citizens in the future
Marek,
of European
I agree
integration.
with you, but you are a diplomat and you speak in nice words. But I look to the reality. ESDP, because I saw very well your CV is full of preparation on the European security. Also, I watched very closely, and I was involved in the beginning in this process. The ESDP was abandoned by the big countries. We have a force of intervention, which is existing as a gendarmerie, which was active in Haiti, but is not active in Ukraine. So I don't want to contradict you, but I'm sure you think like me. But I want to ask you something. Why the big powers of Europe did not saw the 5 million people in Ukraine being affected, and we have now the figures from the United Nations. We are not just making up, right? 360,000 Ukrainians leaving their houses.
Internally
killings,
displaced persons,
killings, rapes, and so on. All these shows us, I mean, 5 million people affected is the biggest number after the Second World War in a war. We cannot mention any, not even the Vietnam. So how come Germany and France, as the pillars of Europe, did not took the initiative on what you said to stop Putin and have this gendarmerie unit, which should be part of the
It's more
SDP,
complicated,
going
Alex,
and not fighting with Putin, but maintaining the peace, because they negotiated a so-called peace. We will not go into the details maybe of the agreement, because I don't think that's a peace. They are on a sovereign state territory, and you negotiate peace. This is not peace.
No, we can have different opinions about it. On
Sure.
CSDP, I think we tried very hard, Poland, together with Germany and France, within so-called Weimar Triangle, to activate this idea of having more common policy, more robust defense, not common defense, because this is not an alternative to NATO, but rather stronger coordination and more ability to act beyond borders of European Union with crisis management operations, different kind of activities. Unfortunately, some of the countries of the European Union were not ready to go in this direction.
The most important countries.
Important countries, yes. Important countries, especially one important country.
Germany.
No.
France?
No.
Well, please mention the country. It's not.
I mentioned that those two countries, together with Poland, were initiators of this idea. But maybe we are not ready yet. Maybe this time will come. But please remember that EU is sending its mission to Ukraine, yes, in order to help the security sector reform. So we are trying to do something.
But in the meanwhile, Putin is going to Mariupol. In the meanwhile, the Russians are not withdrawing their troops, even though they just last night I saw a declaration of the head of the military in the US saying that 12,000 soldiers, American soldiers, are helping the, I don't know how to call them, the Martians, because they are not accepted by anyone. These people fighting in the war in Ukraine. And we talk about sending whom there in Ukraine? Sending people to do what? To teach them how to defend their country.
Observers, trainers, instructors.
But in the meanwhile,
advisors.
People are dying.
I know,
Marek.
I know.
People are dying.
This is very, very dramatic situation. And I think the main goal of this Minsk II agreement, negotiated by the leaders of France and Germany, with President Putin and President Poroshenko, was to stop the violence, to stop the killings. We can say now that this ceasefire, although imperfect, is playing certain positive role. I mean, there are still some casualties. The situation is very fragile, but we managed to, let's say, I don't like this word, de-escalate a little bit the conflict. And you are absolutely right. There are clear evidences that Russian troops are present in Donbass, that the fighting is being conducted with the support, material support, with intelligence support of Russia, that the armaments that is present in Donbass on the side of so-called separatists is supplied by Moscow. So we have clear proofs of this, not only from NATO, but even from the Russian newspapers. And we know how Russian newspapers are, so to say, free to report.
Yeah, non-free, but I understand the brackets.
So I think it was a kind of necessity to do something in order to
what is actually done
to avoid the total disaster.
Total disaster was what? Conquering Ukraine or actually Putin going further? Because you are of course a diplomat, and I'm not asking you to be as blunt as your political leaders, but the Polish political leaders said the truth. The Vice President of the European Parliament, Donald Tusk, as the President of the European Council, your people at home are very clear when it's about what happens with Putin and what happens with Eurasia and what happens with the region. And my feeling is that, unfortunately, it's not about defending Ukraine, because Ukraine was weak as well. Corruption, weak state, and so on was their fault as well to be conquered so easy. But can we accept a precedent? Can we accept a precedent of breaking a border with soldiers and then negotiate a peace? How can you negotiate a peace? Peace means you go back and leave the country free. And we had a peace. I use this term, of course, ironically, myself, because the peace was about changing the constitution of Ukraine. This was what Mr. Putin managed to put in that agreement. That is absolutely outrageous. Redraw the troops of Russia, and they didn't redraw until now.
But please, we have to face the reality. So we see that certain military situation in Donbass that was evolving in the very worrisome direction. So it was a kind of intervention, in order to stop the further deterioration of this conflict. We have no illusions about the intentions of President Putin. He wants to control entire Ukraine, This is not about the Russian-speaking minority. This is only the pretext used by the Russian propaganda. But I think it's important now to give Ukraine the chance to consolidate its statehood, to start to reform its economy, but also to prepare itself and the state structures to resist this aggression, to resist this pressure, to defend itself. So this is why NATO is implementing some projects in order to support Ukrainian armed forces, security structures. Both Poland and Romania, we are involved in those projects very actively. We also...
Yes, of course. We should mention that Romania was designated by NATO through SEREI to create the cyber
framework
system.
Nation in
Yes.
case of cybersecurity. But we need also to support Ukraine in fight against corruption, because you very rightly said that it was one of the diseases, yes, that brought Ukraine to the situation of being powerless, basically, yes, in confrontation with this Russian aggression. So this is the lesson, I think, for many countries, not only of Eastern Europe, but also of, let's say, EU, some other candidate countries to the EU, that if you allow this problem of corruption to persist, to be a kind of systemic disease, it may weaken your statehood, your state institution, and it may threaten your national security. So this is what happened in Ukraine.
Absolutely. Let me go back to one issue you just mentioned, and I consider vital in the context. Poland and Romania are NATO members, and we consider ourselves safe. But let's look very carefully to General Bridlov, the head of the NATO in Europe, yeah, and his deputy that launched a very concerning theory that I want you to comment, because I personally have two people that I respect the most in this conflict: Donald Tusk and Bridlov. They all, I mean, Donald Tusk as a politician and Bridlov as a military. Bridlov was making declarations starting with June 2014 about what will happen in Ukraine, and was not excluding the military intervention. The political cowardice or the political decision and the interests of different states decided not to have an opposition, a real opposition to Russia in doing that. But Russia still has a big power of, let's say, weapons and so on. And Bridlov and his deputy mentioned the possible attack on a NATO country. They mentioned Baltics. I think Poland and Romania can be also a target. How do you think that such a declaration can become real?
I think that NATO is aware of those potential dangers, and this is why during the NATO summit in Newport certain decisions were taken. I would like to mention in particular, the creation of so-called very high readiness task forces, so-called spearhead forces. They will be deployed with a very short notice in case of emergency. Creation of certain command and control centers in 6 countries of the region, including Poland and Romania. This is a very significant step forward, because we were not, so to say, there was no NATO presence actually before on the territory of our countries. Then also creation of headquarters. We have already this headquarter in Szczecin, divisional headquarter here in Romania will be also created in order to make those assurances more credible. Because this is, the Article 5 guarantees, they are very important, but they need to be somehow beefed up with certain military steps.
Before they come, you need to be able to resist 48 hours.
Well, we are speculating now a little bit, but no, I think what we have in mind is to change the, how to say, the orientation of NATO, to bring it back to its original function, to make this reassurance action plan that was adopted in Newport a kind of credible program.
The question is,
and Warsaw Summit in 2016, yes. Warsaw NATO Summit in 2016 will be a kind of historical milestone in this development in order to reassure the countries located on the eastern flank that NATO takes the security of this region very seriously.
They know the question is very blunt and very easy. How far is Putin going, Marek? This is the question, because you are speaking about 2016. Mm-hmm. This is happening next year. Yeah. As the evolution of the events, many things happen until then, can happen. How far can Putin go now? Is a decisive approach, at least I saw that, I'm sorry, this is my opinion, but I saw United States more determined to how to say, to maintain peace and to maintain democracy in Europe than even Europe. I saw United States making the first step, and not Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Hollande, which was behaving very strangely lately, making business with Russia. And I don't think I'm telling a secret, because I can show you the figures on gas and other issues. Why is United States and NATO, or why United States? Obama, in principle, was the one that took the initiative to say, stop in Ukraine, because else we will intervene military. The military approach became possible only after the United States intervened. And your country declared that will send instructors in Ukraine, if I'm right. And my question, of course, will be to you and the British ambassador as well. Ukraine needs instructors, or Ukraine needs really defensive weapons?
I think they need both. So, but answering to your question, I think that we see very high level of coordination between European countries and United States. But we definitely need US leadership in this situation. And we are very happy in Warsaw that President Obama is showing this leadership through his declarations, through the practical steps with regards to the American presence, military presence in the region, through coordinated actions regarding the sanctions against Russia. And you ask how far Russia will go.
Putin,
yes.
I think, because Russia, we shouldn't blame all the Russians. How far can Putin go?
I think that he will try to test step by step our responses and our readiness to
did he try
respond to this aggressive policy.
Did he try to provoke Poland with the airplanes, and has he tried with the Portuguese and the British?
This is very, very dangerous, so to say, behavior, because it can trigger some
did you have cases?
Uncontrolled reactions. We see bigger intensity of Russian military activities in the Baltic Sea. We see some exercises conducted in Kaliningrad, some unannounced exercises, military activities. So this is something that
a provocation to Poland as well.
Is in line with the openly declared policy of perceiving NATO as the main enemy of Russia. It was bluntly declared in the recent military doctrine of Russia. But going back once again to the response.
First, we have to take publicity.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Mr. Ambassador. We have to take the publicity, and then coming back to this very interesting discussion about Putin, Russia, and what can happen.
Da, ai toate motivele să te bucuri. În România a început programul Primul tău Volkswagen Golf. Intră în program și beneficiază de cea mai tare ofertă. Prețuri începând de la 14.267 euro, TVA inclus.
Volkswagen. Das Auto.
Johan, cârnați de porc, TVA 7%. John, bacon la micul dejun, TVA 0. Ionuț, mici, TVA 24%. Taie TVA la carne și la preparatele din carne. Află cum pe taietva.ro.
Indiferent de vârstă, nu rata momentele care îți fac plăcere și te ajută să îți menții articulațiile sănătoase. Bucură-te de mișcare și acordă importanță menținerii sănătății articulațiilor prin nutriția acestora. Alege ce e mai bun pentru tine. Proenzi Arthrostop Rapid cu formulă inovatoare contribuie la menținerea sănătății, elasticității și flexibilității articulațiilor. Proenzi Arthrostop Rapid. Libertate în mișcare. Acesta este un supliment alimentar. Citiți cu atenție prospectul.